Welcome to the Expanding Consciousness podcast with your hosts, Michael Wally and Nicholas Haag. In this podcast, we explore ways to sharpen our awareness, make life more enjoyable, be a little kinder, become more authentic, less reactive, more present, and ultimately expand our consciousness. We're happy to have you along for the ride, and if you do enjoy these conversations, please leave a review or a comment, as this goes a long way for us. Enough of the promotional talk and enjoy this episode.
Hello, welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking about relationships and how you can use relationships as a vehicle for your own spiritual growth. So tell me, Nick, do you use your relationship for your spiritual growth?
Certainly. I would say growth in general. It's a great tool for mutual growth because your partner often sees things that you don't see, right? So we have the feeling that we walk around with certain blind spots about our own behaviors. And when you are, especially in an intimate relationship, you have a person with which you hopefully after some time feel safe enough that you can start to slowly tell each other these small annoyances or maybe these small things that we would maybe never notice ourselves. But then, we get to share them with each other and grow. It's difficult because it can still be painful, if you're getting some difficult feedback by your partner. But it's very rewarding. And I was also in some relationships where this wasn't the case, and I'd say they were really miserable after some time. So in my experience so far, this is kind of the recipe for the success in my current relationship is that we kind of committed to, we're going to tell each other shit. Like if something bothers us, let's use the opportunity. Let's talk about it. Let's grow, and I think was for us quite a healthy foundation for the relationship. How about you?
Yeah, definitely. I really like your point about sort of getting a little bit more of objective feedback from your partner, because I think that's a really good place for growth, for potential there. And it's also a really big challenge because it tends to hit the ego and it tends to make us defensive. But yeah, I think to kind of go back to the original question, I definitely see a lot of growth coming out of my relationship. And I think one of the important aspects or kind of valuable catalysts for growth from a relationship is your investment in it, right? Like you're with someone that you love, that you want to take care of and do the best for them. And a lot of times your stuff, your ego, your baggage gets in the way of being able to do that. And in my own relationship, it often comes up like this thought or this idea, well, I don't want to change you so that you avoid hitting my stuff. I don't want you to feel like you have to constantly walk on eggshells around me and avoid certain topics or something like that, right? And so that's a motivation to work on those things myself. Like, hey, if something's bothering me, it's, maybe it's not necessarily something that I try to make the other person change or do differently, but maybe it's an opportunity for me to work on myself and investigate myself, right? And I think it's really important just in general that you're kind of both on the same page, right? Like you're both doing a little bit of work on yourselves and trying to make that progress, right? So yeah, I totally see a lot of value in relationships in that regard.
Yeah. One thing, you mentioned projections. One thing that happens in relationships is that we project a lot of things onto our partner. So I think that starts with when you are fresh in a new relationship, then you're sort of in this honeymoon phase, and there's a picture of your partner that you're holding up in your mind. But once you get into an intimate relationship and stuff gets real, obviously you're going to get to know all the sides of your partner. And this is not only going to be nice sides. And yeah, then the honeymoon phase stops, and we start to see the real person. And then on top of that, we can also project our own problems, our own shortcomings onto our partner. And I think it can create a lot of tension in a partnership. Do you have any ideas how to make these things visible in a relationship? Like, how can you avoid it? How can you work with that? Do you have any practical experience?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a couple of different techniques that I personally use in relationship, especially when I find things kind of getting a little rocky. One of the first ones that I like to share with people is this strategy I call kind of getting back to brass tacks, getting back to kind of shared interests, shared motivation, shared intentions in the relationship, right? So a lot of times the places where we end up arguing, the places where we end up kind of running into issues in a relationship is in the minutia, in some of the details of day to day, like, oh, I thought you were going to take out the trash or something like that, right? And so this strategy really says, let's get back to the point where we agree. Like, we both agree that we're in this relationship to love each other and to make each other happy. So let's start there and then move towards our problem rather than starting at our problem and getting caught up in the details, because a lot of times you just can't iron out those details. But if you start from a place where you're like, okay, we agree, we love each other, we're here to support each other's growth. Now, how do we take steps where we agree on both of those steps and move towards the problem so that you can start to resolve it? Another thing I like to do, and it's maybe a little bit radical, and I'd say that's pretty much try to own everything that I'm feeling, right? One of the biggest issues that I've personally encountered is this tendency towards blame. So when you're feeling something that you really don't want to feel, maybe that's anxiety, maybe you're feeling guilty or embarrassed, there's a tendency to blame the other person. Like, well, you made me feel embarrassed. You made me feel guilty because you said this thing that you shouldn't have said that, right? And that tends to just cause the other person to get defensive and attack you right back, and start picking on the things that they think you've done wrong, right? And it just goes back and forth, and you're just blaming each other and not really doing very well. So my approach to that in general, and like I said, this is a little bit radical. It can be a pretty big challenge, but it's just to always own how I feel. I never blame the other person, even if they did something that triggered that emotion within me. I really only see their role as, okay, it was incidental. That emotion was something that was already in me that I repressed probably during childhood. And now this person triggered it and brought it up, and that's fine. I'm not going to blame them for that, though. I'm not going to blame them and say that they did something wrong. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to kind of try to work with whatever's come up. I like to kind of reframe it and see it as like, okay, my negative emotions, my repressed emotions don't always surface. And when they do, it's actually an opportunity to work, like surrender, for example. You can use surrender with that. So I don't know if I kind of went on a tangent there. I don't know if I actually answered your exact question, but those are just two strategies I've found really useful in my relationship.
Yeah, I think so. It sounds a bit advanced. It sounds like something where you need a bit of practice to not go into the space of blaming. But yeah, what I find useful is, so there's always this extra layer going on of the patterning that we bring into the relationship. So all the stuff we patterned ourselves growing up in society and so on, that makes us get triggered, that makes us blame, that makes us feel guilty. And the trick for me is to find the difference. Like, am I reacting genuinely right now? Is my emotion reaction genuine? or is this some kind of pattern? Sometimes it's even patterns that we inherited. So yeah, me and my wife, we sometimes joke around because we kind of already identified when we switch out of our genuine, authentic personalities into the stress induced, let's say, masks that sometimes you can clearly identify with your parents. So, for example, sometimes when my wife has a shitty day and then she's being shitty to me, she really reminds me of her father. And just by letting her know that, I'm like, oh, your father is here with us in the room now. Interesting. That kicks her that much out of situation that she's able then to reflect, and then usually situation a tense situation becomes funny. And the other way around, my wife knows exactly when I'm just playing out whatever I inherited from my father. Yeah, and it's interesting to observe in a relationship dynamic. When do we slide out of our authentic selves into one of these inherited masks?
Yeah, I really like that. First of all, I like the idea of just kind of bringing a little bit of levity into those situations, right? Of bringing a little bit of humor so that it's, a little bit lighter, right? A little bit lighthearted. And then also, yeah, I think it is really important to be able to recognize those patterns as well, and realize that, okay, maybe this isn't me, right? This is one of my parents talking. And I think that it can be really valuable to, it can be very humbling as well to realize that, okay, we're not always totally ourselves. One of the ways that I see this a lot for myself is I'll be reacting to something and then I'll think to myself, well, if I were in a really good mood right now, would this actually be a problem? And I kind of try to use that as like like I should call it a litmus test. Like, okay, yeah, this feels like a really big problem right now. But if I were actually in a good mood, am I in a good mood right now? Am I in a good place? Oh, wait, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm kind of unhappy. Maybe I'm upset in a bit of a survival response. And at that point, I kind of use that as an indicator to, you know, uh, bring a little bit of levity, and also just kind of let go of what I'm holding on to so tightly, right? Let go of a little bit of ego, let go of my attachments to what's going on, and just realize that there might be a little bit of delusion kind of going on my side. That's actually, I'll kind of get into that a little bit as well. Something that I observed in myself just very, very starkly the other night when I was talking with my wife. We were on a bit of a heated topic. And after a little bit of back and forth, I realized that my mind was completely twisting the things that she was saying. Like, I mean, it didn't feel like I was doing it intentionally, but I recognized the way that I was hearing things was really not the way that she was communicating it. And what was so interesting about this recognition to me is previously it seemed so seamless. It seemed like, okay, this is, what I'm interpreting here. This is what's happening. This is real. I'm being objective here. But then to see very clearly, like, I am not hearing this right. It's kind of a weird limbo to be in, because you kind of lose your bearings a little bit. You're like, okay, I don't even really know what's going on. I don't really know what the other person is saying, and so it's a good opportunity to kind of step back and be like, okay, let me chill out, reevaluate, maybe kind of begin again in this conversation, and just see if I can't, get my bearings, if I can't kind of get myself a little bit more clear headed. I don't know. Do you ever find yourself like totally deluded? I mean, it's a weird way to put it, maybe a little bit, I don't know. But in any case, do you ever find yourself going through something similar in your relationship?
For sure. I mean, I had many situations where I get really stuck in my own interpretation of things. It's almost like you get upset about something, and then you also become attached to your interpretation. It's like, oh, I'm hurt now, and this now needs to be fixed. I was done wrong against, and that makes it even worse to let go, and it makes it even worse to see the other perspective. And then usually it takes quite some effort for my wife, to bring me out of that state, and then finally to be able to communicate, hey, this is how I saw things, and my intention was actually a very different one. And then I'm able to finally grasp that. And so, yeah, I think that happens to everybody. But what would be interesting would be maybe to think about, why does that happen? And you mentioned one interesting thing that you said, I'm gonna chill out first and then maybe talk about it or think about it. And I guess we can also tie this a little bit back in with the states of the nervous system, because I think that might be actually a contributing factor. So one thing I noticed is, imagine you have a stressful day, whatever, at work, and now you're coming home and you're seeing your partner, and your nervous system is kind of already in overdrive. So, the likelihood of you communicating effectively, kindly, unbiased is a little bit lower, right? And this is usually where the stuff happens, like arguments happen, misinterpretation happens, because it's obviously not fair for the other person. You coming out of a stressful situation, that's not the other person's fault, or if that is the case. So what would be really cool would be if we would be able to recognize that, and then sort of give a warning to your partner, be like, just so you know, I had a shitty day, and then your partner can anticipate, okay, his nervous system is anyways in overdrive. I'm not going to start a discussion about a topic that is anyways heated. I'm not going to, go do things like that. Yeah, that is one thing. What else is contributing factors to that?
Yeah, I really like the idea that you're bringing up here around sort of having a strategy beforehand to deal with things. That's one of the things that my wife and I use a lot, is especially when we've kind of, gotten into an argument or something, after the fact, we'll kind of retrospect and be like, okay, if we encounter that situation again, what can we do differently? And again, kind of inviting in that idea of ownership. Like I try to approach it like, okay, what can I do differently in that situation? And then let her figure out what she can do differently, so that I'm not trying to impose something on her. And a lot of times it's really helpful, because then if we get back into that same situation or a similar situation, one of us is probably going to remember, we're going to recognize that, okay, we're going off the rails, and then going to remember that, okay, I said I was going to try to employ this strategy to help this situation. And, that also makes it easier for the other person. It gives them a little bit more space just in general. So that's one strategy I also use in that kind of situation where, where you might be coming home and a little bit dysregulated or something, get on top of that, right? Have some strategies that you're going to use beforehand. But actually, I mean, once you're in the moment, like, what do you do then? Well, I'd say a lot of the stuff that we talked about, like in the polyvagal theory episode. I mean, first of all, recognize that so much of your interpretation of the world is going through the lens of the state of your nervous system. So if you're really upset, if you think the other person's doing some really bad stuff or something, maybe consider, okay, is my nervous system, a little bit out of whack? Am I seeing things a bit distorted right now? And then, like you said, if you are seeing things a little bit distorted, if you can recognize that, and again, you can kind of refer back to that polyvagal theory episode on how to recognize that. There are various different, indicators, of course, like racing heartbeat or the way that you're breathing and stuff. Then you can employ some techniques to kind of cool down. And hey, even a cool idea is that maybe you can employ those techniques together. Learn about polyvagal theory together, or I mean, you don't even need polyvagal theory. Just learn about calming breathwork techniques, and then before getting into any conversation, breathe a little bit together or something. I really like that idea.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Like, today we have to discuss this difficult thing. Let's do the breath work first. Yeah, I like that idea. So I have the feeling that most of the trouble I got into my wife in past relationships was always if one of us was in a too emotional state, which then alters even your personality. And I think this is something which is underestimated sometimes. So to give you one vivid example of that, my wife once had to do an operation, and before that she had to take exogenous estrogen, right? So a hormone that she normally produces, but now was flushing her body like in larger quantities than normally. And then we went through like 1 week of emotional ups and downs. Like one day she was completely sad, and so many topics served for her that we had to go through. And then the next day she was really challenging me and almost, she was insulting me and some stuff was coming up that I thought, oh my God, we already dealt with this. And I was really surprised by that. And it took me some time that I realized, oh wow, okay, this is the hormones working in her. And this is my wife. This is the person I know. However, her state is being altered literally. And after that, she also realized that, but was only able to kind of change course once she didn't have to take the estrogen anymore. And then was also left a bit ashamed. She was like, oh my God, that was so not me. But I think that also happens on a smaller level when we have everyday emotions, especially things like rage, sadness. I don't know. So those emotions which really take you over sometimes. And then you can do things which are even difficult to take back sometimes. Yeah. And this is where it then gets dangerous, because sometimes in the heat of the moment where you are maybe enraged with a small thing, you're suddenly able to perhaps insult your partner, or try to purposefully hurt them, which you would never do normally. But it's like this emotion took you over, and suddenly you're able to do that. And those things, I think, are very difficult to undo then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're hitting on a really important thing, and it's very analogous in a lot of ways to the nervous system aspect that we were talking about. But whether it be the state of your nervous system, you know, your hormonal balance at the time, or any other factors that might be contributing to that, there are often times where we'd say we're not exactly in our right mind, and we might do things or say things during that time that really can be problematic for the relationship. And then to kind of compound things, say a little bit later, the person brings it up, and at that point, you're kind of left with a decision. Well, do I, stick to my guns, even though I was in a bad place at that point? Do I kind of, do I go the ego route and just be like, well, yeah, of course I felt that way, and then, turn it around on them or something? Or do you own it? Do you really fess up and you're like, yeah, I wasn't in a good place. I said things that I really shouldn't have. I really didn't mean to do that, right? So I think it's important to also examine like intentions, right? This kind of gets to that other idea I was talking about of getting back to brass tacks as far as your intention in the relationship. A lot of times we do things or say things that we really didn't intend to, right? Because of emotional hijack, like you mentioned, right? And I think it's important to recognize that happens, right, on both sides, and so give your partner some leeway for when that happens to them, and do your best, not to take too much offense if they insult you and you find out it was from a difficult emotional place. And I think it kind of brings me around to this topic of like holding space, right? Which is a really big one for me just in general. And for me, what it means, and I probably defined it before, but it means just quiet compassion, just being compassionate and loving the other person regardless of what they're going through. And that in and of itself can be a really big challenge, especially if they're projecting their stuff out onto us and blaming us for it. Then it's like, oh, that's heavy. The ego is going to get hit in that, and it's not going to feel good. But can you just be with it rather than throwing it right back at the other person? Because we have a tendency to do that, right? Just throwing blame back and forth, and it just never turns out well in my experience.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of or the image of holding space for each other. I think that's the opportunity. If you have two people who are anyways working on themselves, then how cool is it that you can kind of partner up in that, and you can have a partner in crime? And in ideal scenario, maybe you're going through some things, and then your partner is there to hold space for you, and then it's the other way around, and you're able to step by step bring each other up. Obviously, yeah, you also fall back into patterns sometimes, and then your shit hits your partner's shit. All of that can happen, but as long as you, yeah, maybe that's an important foundation for a relationship, is if you're able to anchor just the fact that what is your baseline intention, that you are in a relationship because you love each other, and that this is the foundation. And if this is the case, then this is also something you can always return to, because if you get caught up in a fight, then you're able to, sometimes that happens to me and my wife, where we fight and have to sometimes realize, okay, is this really important to me? And at the end of the day, we love each other. Oh, let's go from there. How important is this thing? You're able to kind of always go back to that place, and that resolves then most surface issues.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the topics that we're kind of dancing around with all of this is just how important open communication is, right? And as we're talking about like using the relationship as a tool and potentially checking in with each other, potentially calling each other out, it's also, I kind of feel compelled to throw in that you have to be very aware throughout this process that you don't weaponize the process against the other person. So, for example, you don't start calling someone out on something because it bothers you, right? Because it's like, well, you're hitting my stuff right now. Hey, we agreed that we're using this relationship for our own spiritual advancement, and you're doing this, right? So again, it can kind of get back into that area of blame. But I just felt the need to kind of call that out or tease that out, is that this really isn't an easy thing to do, right? Like, it requires a lot of humility, it requires a lot of self-awareness, and it requires investment from both people, and it requires like a lot of recovering from missteps, right? Um, so for example, for me, a lot of times if I said something that I just like totally regret, several minutes or seconds later, and we're not in a good place or something, sometimes I recognize the only thing that I can do is I can just sit with like, I did something, I messed up, right? And I just have to sit with that. And oftentimes, if I sit with it long enough, I'll get to the point where I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to go apologize. I need to go explain myself a little bit better. And at that point, I'll have kind of cooled off enough, right? Like that, also kind of getting back to the idea of letting the nervous system calm down so you can see things more clearly.
Mm. Since there's always ego involved in a relationship, I feel that apologizing is almost like a muscle that you need to train continuously. Because if you're not able to apologize to the other person in a relationship, then that is already problematic. So yeah, it really takes a lot to live a relationship on that level. To be clear, this is something which two people should choose if they want to, because I have the feeling that kind of a relationship is even more difficult than maybe a regular one. Because, on the other hand, you could also live a unconscious relationship, and, you could also find a partner where you just put each other to sleep, right? In terms of your shortcomings, your mistakes with each other, and where you don't talk about that. And maybe that would be less trouble, but I have the feeling that in the long run, it is more rewarding to use the relationship as a vehicle.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I got into my current relationship, it was really not with the intention to, use it for growth for either of us, and really just have like this really beautiful partnership. When I first got into, at least my current relationship, and certainly when I was younger, our relationships were all about getting something from the other person, right? Like, oh, I want you to tell me that you love me. I want you to, give me validation and fill some of those gaps, right? And that's how most of my relationships had started, right? But then you like you were kind of saying earlier, you get past the honeymoon period and you start seeing things for what they really are. And I think that's, oftentimes when a lot of divorce happens. But if you feel invested and you're willing to have the humility to work on yourself and own your own stuff, right? Then I think that's the point when a relationship can start to be really valuable. So it doesn't necessarily, I guess the point that I'm getting at is it doesn't necessarily start off on that foot of like, of course, I think it would be really awesome if you enter a relationship, with that agreement up front. But I don't know if they always start off that way. But eventually for me, it was like, I love this person enough that I want to work on myself. I want to get over my own stuff so that we get along better, so that we have more fun together, and just have a good relationship. Because I recognize that if I were to leave and go somewhere else, I'm just going to encounter the same problems because it's my baggage, right? If I go somewhere else, I'm going to bring it with me.
Yeah, I mean that would be cool on the one hand if there would be, maybe like an app for conscious dating where people consciously choose to engage in advanced relationships. But as you say, sometimes you're just attracted by who you're attracted, and maybe it starts just with sexual attraction, and then it develops into a more loving and conscious relationship. But I would say that at one point in the relationship, we definitely need to question our own motives and the motives of our partner, because, yeah, I think it's also easy to end up in dysfunctional relationship dynamics, which nevertheless work really well. So I've also seen people who have been very long together, and I've also been I kind of overstayed my welcome in relationships, or our relationship was lasting long. And that's why I thought that it's an important relationship, but this was not the case. It was just, a dysfunctional dynamic, which just really worked well. It's like a well-oiled machine, and we were actually in the long run hurting each other. I can give some like maybe personal examples how a dynamic could be dysfunctional. I'd say that maybe due to my childhood, my situation with my parents, I'm sort of a people pleaser and what some people call empath. And I have the tendency to attract actually people who we would call narcissists. Either I'm talking about narcissists on like a narcissistic disorder level, but just narcissists on level of personality. And this dynamic works really well because I love to please people to get the validation. That's ultimately what I need. I want validation from people. And this is really great for narcissists to exploit because they're very skillful at it. And they see me basically as this resource. It's like, okay, I just got to give this person a tiny bit of attention and he's going to do whatever I want. And, I've been many times in my life, not necessarily in romantic relationships also, but not always, with those types of people. And was kind of a relationship loop that happens, also this really well-oiled machine, in which I definitely was not benefiting in the long run. And I think the way to get out of these things is to question your motivation. Because it took me a really long time to understand, okay, I'm actually doing that for the short-term validation. And I am not actually honestly given and being of service in this relationship. Because I think for a genuine relationship, that's what we should aim for. We should aim for being of service to the other person. And if you realize, okay, I'm actually in this thing because I want to get out something. And when I'm not getting that stuff out, I'm getting pissy or whatever. And that's maybe an indicator, okay, we don't have a genuine connection here. We have a dysfunctional thing going on here. Yeah, and that usually, so for me, it took me a long time to realize that, but it's just one example. Have you ever had an example of a dysfunctional relationship?
Uh, yeah, I'd say that there are examples, of maybe not totally dysfunctional, but maybe more like dysfunctional aspects of relationships, and I can totally relate to being a people pleaser as well. Fortunately, at least as far as I can tell, my current relationship, the other person is not too narcissistic, so there's not really like too much. I don't think I'm being taken advantage of in terms of my people pleasing. But I think you're getting onto something kind of interesting. That there are different dynamics that can happen in relationships. There's like these dynamics that fit really well together, but they prohibit your growth, right? Like the dynamic that you're talking about of people pleasing and a narcissist who's going to potentially take advantage of that, right? Like they mesh really well together. There's not going to be a lot of friction, but it's going to prevent either of those people from really growing. It's going to like kind of make you stuck where you're at, right? But then there's also sort of the flip side of that where you might have two dynamics. Okay, so this is an example of maybe a dysfunctional dynamic that I've experienced before. I was in a relationship where the other person had some of these abandonment type wounds, right, where they hadn't gotten all of the attention that they really needed growing up, and so they were a little bit clingy, right? They would constantly need validation that you love them, that you're there for them, that you're not going to leave them. And then that really clashed with wounds that I had where I really needed my space. I needed not to be smothered. And so this person would like, if we'd get into one of these kind of dysfunctional areas, uh, the other person would sort of smother me, asking for my love, asking for all of these things from me, and that would totally push me the opposite direction, which would of course only heighten their fear of abandonment, right? Which of course would cause them to be clingier, which would then cause me to push away harder, which I mean, it just like snowballed, right? Until one of us can kind of like step outside of that and recognize it, or we move apart for some time and then, cool off and are maybe able to see things a little bit more clearly. But I think that there are a lot of these different types of dynamics that we can get into, like, just more generally, even like kind of victim aggressor type thing where somebody is typically in a victim role and somebody is in an aggressor role, and the victim really activates the aggressor, right? When the aggressor feels like they're hurting the other person, that only ramps them up more, and then the guilt pushes them, right? And then the person that's being attacked, the person that's being the victim in the situation, of course, what the other person is ramping up, that's going to push them further and further into their victimhood, right? So I think that there are a lot of dynamics like this that can go on in relationships and really prevent any sort of growth. And they can be really hard to see too, because we're so strongly identified with those roles. So yeah, there's a lot of different dysfunctional dynamics that can happen.
Mm. When you talk about dynamics, then another image comes to mind, and that would be the idea of, we talked already a lot about the shadow and how everybody has their own personal shadow, which is sort of the blind spot of behaviors and things, personality aspects that you don't see. And I think in the same way, in a relationship, you have two shadows of two people, and then you also have the shadow of the relationship, because the relationship becomes also almost this entity, or at least a system which kind of works automatically when two people come together. And yeah, it's really hard to spot sometimes, but just being aware, that there also might be shadows in relationships, I think can be really helpful. On the other hand, I think if we have this system or this entity of relationship, I think there's also really positive things that could come out of it that people are also maybe not aware of. And one thing I heard about, and where I'm maybe curious about your opinion on that, is the idea of co-creation. So So the basic idea would be that you're in a romantic relationship specifically, and since you already have this really nice dynamic of making each other grow, going through good and bad times together, then that you could also use this dynamic to create something together. Let it be something creative or perhaps a business or so on. But to be honest, I've always been a bit afraid of that because I always thought, this might be the one thing which maybe my relationship is not ready to go through financial struggles together. Also, being in the same project, maybe 24/7 together, that this is the one thing that would overstretch our relationship, or that we could spoil it with such a thing. So I'm curious where you stand there. Do you think it's a good idea to co-create with your partner?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, and I think what it requires to be successful in that is again, and it's interesting. I keep mentioning this word humility, right? But also kind of an openness, right? Because one thing that I find when my wife and I try to create things together is we tend to have such drastically different approaches and really like even goals for what we're creating that it makes it kind of very difficult to actually align and do something where both people are contributing more or less equally. What usually ends up happening is one person will kind of take the reins and be like, sort of the boss or the manager of the situation and be like, okay, well, in order to do this and achieve this goal, you need to do these things. I'm going to do these parts, right? And then it kind of loses that co-creative aspect where you're both really contributing in like a genuine way. And I think it's really a pretty big challenge to co-create something genuinely because it's gonna run into your stuff, right? Like just like being in the relationship, it's gonna hit on your identifications. It's gonna bring up the different ways of doing things that maybe you're opposed to, or maybe, like I said, isn't really in alignment with you. And then you have to find out, can I let go of that enough that I can continue working with, somebody who's doing something entirely different, or entirely different approach. So I think even just finding that ability to cooperate like in a really well balanced way in and of itself is a really big challenge and also opportunity for growth. So I think it's a potentially valuable endeavor, but maybe start small.
Good point. Maybe feel the waters and understand how well are you able to establish a dynamic which is not necessarily a romantic one. Because if you realize that, you're throwing each other off balance there, or, you get into this dynamic of one person then carrying a project and the other person, um, just winging it, that could become problematic. I sort of still romanticize that idea, but yeah, like you say, maybe taking small steps. Another thing which is really triggering for me is the idea of polyamory, right? This is also
Hmm.
something which is gaining traction again. This idea of like, we don't have only one partner. Romantic love is not reserved only for one person in your life. And so while like I'm really happy with one partner, and I think there's enough satisfaction for me for one lifetime. But I also think about like how complex that would be to be in a relationship with multiple people. All of them have their needs, and then I think it really quickly gets like exponentially complicated when you have such relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can't speak from experience in regard to this, but very interesting topic just to bring up in general. And so, yeah, brings up so many tangents to go on. I guess one thing I want to say is that so much of what we're talking about here, like you said, doesn't even necessarily apply specifically to romantic relationships. Although we're talking about it in the context more or less of romantic relationships, it really applies to all relationships, right? Like all of these dynamics are possible between, in anyone, friends, family, whatever. So just kind of to recognize that. And then navigating something as complex as like more than two people in a relationship. Yeah, I think it requires a lot of as any successful relationship requires a lot of open communication, a lot of honesty, and again, that word, a lot of humility, as well as like just I like that you hit on needs, right? Because I think this is a valuable one that we haven't quite touched on yet. Um, because there are kind of two sides to needs that I think are a little bit complex, and that's that first of all you have to understand your own needs, understand whether or not you genuinely need those things or just think you need those things, and then you need to be able to communicate it in such a way that you're not offending the other person, not making them feel like they're less than, or like that they aren't satisfying your needs or something, right? So again, another, I think, important area for relationships and communication just in general. Um, how do you go about communicating your needs in a relationship? Has that been a stumbling block, or has that been pretty straightforward for you?
Like you say, it's sometimes it takes some time to even recognize your needs. But I also noticed that a lot of the times in conflict, sometimes afterwards you realize, okay, I have a need which is not being met here, and this is the reason why we're having this conflict. But yeah, being aware of your own needs requires a lot of reflection, let's say.
Yeah, and it requires a lot of honesty with ourselves because it can be really difficult even to admit. I don't know about you, but the way that I was raised, I don't need anything, right? I don't. I'm sort of one of those DIY, wear your T-shirt until it falls off your back kind of thing, And it was interesting. Like, and I can recall in my first relationship, uh, the woman and her family would buy me a lot of clothes because I'd wear kind of ratty clothes. I mean, I was a construction worker, and it was almost a point of pride, that my clothes had holes in them and stuff like that, right? So it's interesting how it starts to expose our identifications and things like that, just in general.
Yeah, and it's I think it's important to always also keep the balance in a relationship. That's maybe another toxic dynamic that can occur, that it starts to be only about one person, and only the needs of one person are being met. And this I think happens with where we have one person which loves to give, which is nice. I mean, it's nice that those people exist, and I think they also can find it fulfilling. But again, if they're just if it's sort of a one-sided dynamic, I think in the long run cannot work.
Yeah, yeah, and also on this topic of needs and everything, I want to touch on this idea of like I think it's called love languages. I don't know. Have you ever come across this out of curiosity?
Nope, never heard of it.
Okay, so it's basically this idea that there are certain ways that you want to be shown affection, and this is talking about like, for example, I think some of the love languages are like you like receiving gifts, right? That really shows you that the other person loves you, or you like affection, right? Or you like praise, or whatever it is that you feel most satisfied with, right? And this is one that uh, I wouldn't say struggled with, but it's something that I'm aware of in my relationship, and I don't feel like we found quite our balance with it yet, right? Where my wife, she likes to be given gifts, right? And she also likes to give gifts. Me, on the other hand, I don't really want gifts. I kind of have everything that I want. So I want you to do things for me. I want you to show me your love by doing chores that I would otherwise have to do, by alleviating me of tasks, right? And that's how I show love to my wife, by doing her laundry or something, and then she shows love to me by giving me gifts, and it's like I don't really want this gift, and she wants me to give her a gift, but instead I'm doing her laundry or something, right? So the, sort of the point of love languages is to identify the way that you want to be shown love, and then to express that to the other person so that they can then do that for you. Of course, that is potentially asking them to change if the way that they show love is not the way that you feel like you want to see it. But again, just another another space, another opportunity to find compromise and have open communication, right?
Yeah, I like that idea. It's a cute idea. I probably have to think about like what is my love language. Maybe we can think about that with my wife. So I like that the fact that you then take that and there's something like you want to learn about your partner and there's something you want to respect then, and then maybe once in a while you will think about that and try to give your partner something with that. On the other hand, what do you think? Should you make your partner change or not? And to give a bit more nuance to that question, so we now talked about a conscious relationship where you're pointing stuff out from the other person, but where's actually the limit? Because one could also argue, okay, if you are in a relationship with a person and you're constantly trying to change the person, why are you in the first place in a relationship with that person? And so where's the line there for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think that we can give an answer that is like a perfect answer. I don't think we can solve that problem. For me, the way that I look at it is when I feel like I need to change something about the other person, more often than not, and more recently as I've gotten better at doing the surrender and all this other work that we talk about, more often than not, I'll use that as an indicator of, okay, is there something, do I have some sort of hang up? Is this some ego thing? Is this some attachment thing that I need them to be a certain way, or look a certain way, or do a certain thing, right? And I think more often than not, maybe even I'd go so far as to say pretty much 100% of the time, when I need the other person to change, it's because I don't feel okay, because there's something that I'm not okay with, and suddenly my brain has projected that feeling onto the other person or some aspect of the other person, and now my brain is telling me, well, you won't have to feel this way anymore if you just get them to change in this way, right? Which of course I've learned at this point is just kind of nonsense. That's just the brain projecting. It doesn't really know that. And even if the other person does change that way, I'm still going to have that suppressed emotion or whatever the source was. So usually I'll look at any desire or compulsion to have the other person change as something where I need to do more work on myself. I guess the way that I approach it is, if there's something that I see in the other person that I know that they also want to change about themselves, and it would be valuable for me to point that out, I might try to point it out in like a very objective way, like, oh, hey, I noticed you were doing this, and I know that you said that you kind of wanted to curb that behavior. It doesn't bother me at all. I totally accept it. It's perfectly fine, but in case you wanted to know, there it is, and I'm seeing this, and in case you weren't seeing it or something, right? Like approaching it very delicately. Just knowing that anytime there's something about the other person that is like feels offensive or something, I'm going to tend to approach that in such a way that they're going to feel defensive about it. And so I just want to be really aware and approach it really delicately, so not to trigger the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some sensitivity would be required. I guess in my case, I am asking sometimes for like smaller behaviors to be changed, but in general, I think we should stay open to the possibility of or each person in a relationship having the possibility to also say no. This is something I want to keep. So
Sure.
not forcing the other person to change. Because maybe a person also doesn't want to give up some things, and especially if we're talking about like personality traits, then it's, I think, getting dangerous if we're trying to change the personality of another person. For example, if you have dynamics like you have a extroverted person and an introverted person, and then this maybe becomes a problem because the extrovert person wants to go out all the time with friends, the other person wants to stay in, or this is really then one of the dynamics where it becomes difficult, and I think where there should be some strong compromises. Otherwise, it's not probably not bound to work long term if you're not able to create compromises. But another thought there, since I mentioned like introvert extrovert, What is your opinion on relationship compatibility? There's people who firmly believe that you should have a partner which is, the opposite of you. There's people who prefer to have people that are very similar to them. And there's this idea that we're choosing our partners based on our parents. What is your take on that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess one way I'd look at it is from the growth perspective, which I think is pretty much what we're talking about here. There needs to be a certain amount of discomfort, which you might be able to translate as, on the surface incompatibility, right? In terms of one person, say, being an extrovert and one person, say, being an introvert or something, right? If you have two introverts together and you're really comfortable at home, never going out, never challenging yourself, you're probably not going to grow. I mean, maybe that's what you want. Maybe you're not looking for that sort of growth in a relationship, which that's totally fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that by any means. But if you want growth, then I think you need to have somebody that's going to challenge you in some ways. And that might mean somebody that doesn't on the surface seem entirely compatible. I think there's kind of risk at either end. On the one hand, if you have somebody that's too much like yourself, you have the risk of kind of forming an echo chamber where you're really just building your ego, both of your egos up, and you're not challenging yourself. You're not putting yourself in uncomfortable situations where you can really grow. Um, on the other hand, if you're totally, black and white, night and day or something, right? Then yeah, it might be too uncomfortable. You might be too pushed too far outside of, referring back to polyvagal theory and such, you might be pushing yourself too far outside your window of tolerance, such that you're always dysregulated and you're always kind of like on your toes and you can't actually make any meaningful progress because you're constantly, confused. You're constantly, trying to sort things out, trying to reach some point of clarity. So I think that there is a balance, right? For me personally, like I said, none of these things were on my radar when I first got into my relationship. So as far as compatibility, honestly, I think if you're willing to work on it, just about anybody would be compatible with anyone else, as long as you're both willing to work on it. Um, that might be a
Sure.
bit of a controversial opinion. I don't know.
Um, okay, that opens another tangent for me, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot and discussing also with some friends, especially with people who, for example, come from Asia, Southeast Asia, where there's a bit of a different idea about romantic relationships. And here in the West, I grew up with this sort of Disney idea that out there somewhere there's this one perfect person, which is the perfect match to my personality. We're just gonna, once we meet each other, we're gonna interlink, and from then on, it's gonna be like smooth sailing because we complement each other, and we're gonna grow together. And I find that problematic from the perspective that it's sort of a perfect image, which is anyways difficult to reach. And I think it can lead to people in relationships be maybe unhappy, or at least be on the as soon as they encounter problems in the relationship, be on the outlook. Okay, maybe there's not my 100% match. Maybe out there's another person which matches better with me. And on the other hand, what I learned from how it works in Asia, like in the extreme, there is still in some countries arranged marriage, like back in India, for example. And I met people who met like that and who live honestly a more successful marriage than some of the people in the West. And when you ask them how they think about it, they don't think about they don't have this idea at all that you find your match out there, but they rather think about relationships as this thing that grows. And like as long as both have the commitment, we're gonna grow this thing. It doesn't. So they don't necessarily need the perfect partner to start with. They more believe, okay, this is the other person. How can we find compromise? How can we work with each other? And then over time, it becomes this really cool thing which nobody maybe anticipated. Yeah, I'm also wondering, where do you land on that?
Yeah, yeah. I really like this idea. Sort of a little bit influenced from some things that, for example, Sadhguru has said on this particular topic of like arranged marriages, and so from that perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and I think that there's a lot of potential for growth in that, you know, you're forced into a relationship, or you go into a relationship with someone that maybe you didn't personally choose, right? And now the question is, okay, can we make this work? And I think in order to make that sort of thing work, as with any relationship, regardless of how it first came about, you usually have to let go of a certain amount of ego. It usually like is very good for kind of like cutting away the ego, right? Because that's what's going to get in the way of your compatibility. That's what's going to get in the way of having a good relationship is your expectations, your likes, your dislikes, all of that ego stuff, essentially. So I think it's an interesting idea. I don't know if I would have wanted that to happen personally for me. I can't say, you know, having not grown up in that sort of culture. I suppose, you know, for those of us that are maybe a little bit more introverted and have a hard time finding a partner, it might make it a little bit easier in that sense. I don't have to do it. My parents are gonna, you know, betroth me to someone or whatnot. So it's interesting. Like I said, I don't know if I'd try it myself, but I think that it can. I think that it can work, and I think that it's really interesting. That it often does result in a better relationship potentially than when people actually end up choosing, right? And I suppose one thing that speaks towards is that when we're making that initial decision, it is not a very well informed decision, right? Like, I mean, maybe for some people, but I think for most of us, like, you know, it's based on a certain level of attraction, and you're in this honeymoon period where you're really, really enjoying each other's company, and you really don't know each other all that well. Certainly not like the downsides that you're eventually going to discover, right? But yeah, I mean, relationships can be difficult when you bring a lot of expectation to it. Kind of like you were mentioning that Disney idea of a relationship. If you're expecting it to be magical for the rest of your life, and you know, make all of your wildest dreams come true, then I think you're gonna go through a lot of divorces. You're gonna go through a lot of partners trying to find that.
Yeah, and that seems also to be the trend. As a friend, there's so much divorce happening nowadays. All the reality shows that are popular at the moment are also kind of, you know, around this idea, like all of this Love is Blind and all of that stuff, to find your perfect match. I agree with you. I wouldn't like to, you know, have my parents like choose my partner. I think that would have been terrible. So I feel a bit sorry for people who had that happen to them. But I find it cool that there is like such a big group of people that can embrace that idea. You know, it's certainly outside of my comfort zone to say, okay, I'm not even going to choose, somebody else is going to choose. But it's so cool to see that they embrace this, and that there's still some happy marriages coming out of that.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. That might be pretty close to a good place to end it. There is one last comment I wanted to throw in here, just sort of one of my mini caveats, right? Like, none of what we're talking about today is to say that, like, if you're in a bad situation, if you're in a dangerous relationship, that you should just work with that, and, you know, and that it's something that you need to change about yourself. We're talking about, you know, more functional type situations, right? Not any sort of danger, not any sort of violence. So if you are in that type of situation, we're not saying stay in it, right? Like, do what you need to do to get yourself into a safe situation. So I just felt the need to throw that in.
Yeah, I can double down on that. I see also many relationships where people are together just because they're used to it and it's comfortable to stay together. And that's honestly also pretty sad to see sometimes. I found myself also in situations, you know, where I was too long in a relationship, you know, just because it was kind of, we got used to it, it was comfortable, and it was actually time to end it. And I know that it's difficult, even worse to see sometimes people in that situation decide to make kids as a response to that, to kind of
Sure.
re-spark the relationship,
Right.
which is like terrible outlook for the kids to come out of that kind of relationship. So I'd say if you have a lot of doubts about your relationship, you should probably stop the relationship. I know it sounds really, really bad, or maybe it sounds a bit like a dark outlook, but if there's a lot of doubts, there might be a reason. And if you can't think of enough reasons to fight for a relationship, maybe question your relationship. I think that's also important sometimes.
Well, I'd say that's a show.